the day Africa defeated a European empire. Have you ever wondered if there was a moment in history when an African army didn't just resist European colonization, but completely crushed one of Europe's most powerful empires? Not survived, not escaped, but defeated them so completely that the entire world was forced to stop and pay attention. This is not fiction. This is one of the greatest military victories in world history. A battle so extraordinary that European newspapers called it impossible. A battle that changed Africa forever. On March 1, 1896, thousands of Ethiopian warriors stood on the mountains near a small town called Adwa. Across from them stood a modern European army armed with advanced rifles, artillery, and years of military experience. The Europeans were certain of victory. They believed this battle would be over within hours. Instead, it became one of the greatest humiliations any European empire had ever suffered in Africa. But how did an African kingdom accomplish something that almost no other nation on the continent could? What made Ethiopia different? Who was the brilliant leader who united an entire nation against foreign invasion? And why is the Battle of Adwa still celebrated across Africa more than a century later? Today, we're uncovering the incredible true story of courage, strategy, and one battle that proved Africa could never be underestimated. Stay with us until the end, because the final moments of this battle shocked the entire world and changed history forever. Part 2: Africa Under Threat. The late 19th century was one of the darkest periods in African history. Across the continent, European powers were racing to claim land, resources, and influence. Britain expanded from Egypt to South Africa. France built a massive empire across West Africa. Germany established colonies in East and Southwest Africa. Belgium seized the Congo, where millions would suffer under brutal colonial rule. Portugal tightened its grip on Angola and Mozambique. European leaders divided Africa on maps in distant conference rooms, often without any African representatives present. To them, Africa was territory to be claimed. But one nation stood apart: Ethiopia. Unlike most African kingdoms, Ethiopia had a long history of independence, a strong Christian tradition, experienced military commanders, and rulers who understood that unity would be essential for survival. Leading this proud nation was Emperor Menelik II. He knew that European powers were expanding rapidly. He also knew that resisting them would require more than courage. It would require preparation. So while European leaders underestimated Ethiopia, Menelik was quietly building one of the strongest armies on the continent. He purchased modern rifles from several countries. He strengthened alliances between regional leaders. He stockpiled supplies and trained thousands of soldiers. Most importantly, he united people from different regions, languages, and cultures under one purpose: protect Ethiopia, protect freedom, protect independence. What Italy didn't realize was that they were not invading a weak kingdom. They were marching toward a nation that had been preparing for this moment for years. Battle of Adwa, the day Africa defeated a European empire. Part 3: Italy's fatal mistake and Menelik II's brilliant strategy. While Emperor Menelik II was preparing Ethiopia for war, Italy believed victory was already guaranteed. Italy had arrived late to the race for colonies in Africa. Britain and France had already claimed vast territories, and Italy wanted an empire of its own. To prove itself as a major European power, it set its sights on Ethiopia. In 1889, the two countries signed what became known as the Treaty of Wuchel. But there was one enormous problem. The Italian version of the treaty claimed that Ethiopia had agreed to become an Italian protectorate, meaning Italy would control its foreign affairs. The Ethiopian version said something completely different. It simply stated that Ethiopia could ask Italy for diplomatic assistance if it wished. That single mistranslation changed everything. Italy announced to the world that Ethiopia now belonged under its influence. But when Emperor Menelik II discovered the deception, he was furious. He rejected the treaty completely and declared that Ethiopia would never surrender its independence. For Italy, this was more than an insult. It was a challenge to its national pride. Italian leaders believed Ethiopia would be an easy victory. They assumed that modern European weapons and professional soldiers would overwhelm any African army within days. They couldn't have been more wrong. Instead of panicking, Menelik II began one of the greatest military mobilizations in African history. Messengers traveled across the mountains carrying the emperor's call to arms. Princes, generals, village chiefs, farmers, horsemen, even ordinary citizens answered the call. Thousands marched from every corner of Ethiopia, bringing whatever they could contribute. Some carried rifles purchased from Europe and Russia. Others brought spears, swords, shields, food, livestock, and supplies. Women played a vital role as well. Many prepared food, transported equipment, cared for the wounded, and helped keep the enormous army supplied during its long march through the mountains. Soon, Ethiopia had assembled an army unlike anything Italy expected. More than 100,000 determined fighters stood ready to defend their homeland. This wasn't just an army. It was an entire nation united by one purpose. Meanwhile, the Italian commander, General Oreste Baratieri, faced growing pressure from politicians back in Rome. They demanded a quick victory. The longer the campaign lasted, the more expensive it became. Baratieri knew the Ethiopian army was much larger than expected. He wanted to wait. He preferred to strengthen his position before attacking. But politicians accused him of being weak and cowardly. Determined to prove himself, he made a decision that would change history forever. Instead of waiting, he ordered his troops to march toward Adwa under the cover of darkness. It seemed like a bold plan, but it was built on dangerous assumptions. The Italian maps were outdated and inaccurate. The rugged mountains were unfamiliar. Communication between different divisions quickly broke down. As soldiers struggled through steep valleys and rocky hills in the middle of the night, entire units became separated from one another. Some marched in the wrong direction. Others stopped without knowing where the rest of the army had gone. Before sunrise, the Italian force that was supposed to attack together had become scattered across miles of difficult terrain. What was meant to be one powerful army had become isolated groups with little chance of supporting each other. From the surrounding mountains, Ethiopian scouts watched every movement. They immediately reported the confusion to Emperor Menelik II. The emperor realized this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Instead of attacking blindly, he calmly adjusted his battle plan. His generals would strike each isolated Italian column before they could reunite. One by one, with overwhelming force. The trap had been set, and as the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains of Adwa, thousands of Ethiopian warriors prepared to launch an attack that would shock the world forever. Part 4. The battle that shocked the world. The sun had barely risen over the rugged mountains of Adwa on the morning of March 1, 1896. A cold wind swept across the rocky hills as thousands of Ethiopian warriors waited in complete silence. They knew this day would decide the future of their nation. Far below, the Italian army was already in trouble. General Baratieri's carefully planned attack had fallen apart before the battle had even begun. His 4 divisions were scattered across miles of steep mountains and deep valleys. Many soldiers had marched through the entire night without food or rest. Some units had lost contact with their commanders. Others had no idea where their allies were. Instead of one united army, Italy had become several isolated groups, each vulnerable to attack. High above them, Ethiopian scouts observed every movement. They rushed back with the news. The enemy was divided. Emperor Menelik II wasted no time. Standing before his generals, he gave the order they had been waiting for. Advance! Within moments, tens of thousands of Ethiopian warriors began moving down the mountains. The earth seemed to shake beneath their feet. War drums echoed through the valleys. Battle horns sounded across the hills. The silence of dawn was replaced by the roar of an entire nation charging into battle. The 1st Italian Division suddenly found itself surrounded. From every direction, Ethiopian soldiers appeared over the hills. Some carried modern rifles. Others charged with spears and swords. All were united by one purpose: protect their homeland. Italian officers tried desperately to organize their defenses. Artillery opened fire. Machine guns rattled across the mountains. The first waves of Ethiopian fighters suffered heavy casualties. But they did not stop. Again and again, they pushed forward. For every warrior who fell, another stepped into his place. The sheer size of the Ethiopian army overwhelmed the Italian positions. Meanwhile, another Italian division was facing an even worse situation. Completely separated from the rest of the army, it found itself attacked from multiple directions at once. The narrow mountain passes made it impossible to maneuver. Soldiers struggled to reload under constant fire. Officers shouted orders that could barely be heard over the chaos. Communication had completely collapsed. General Baratieri soon realized the horrifying truth. His army was being defeated piece by piece. He attempted to send reinforcements. But it was already too late. The rough terrain slowed every movement. By the time help arrived, many positions had already fallen. Across the battlefield, Ethiopian commanders showed remarkable coordination. Ras Mikoan led disciplined assaults that broke through Italian defenses. Ras Alula used the mountainous landscape to trap retreating soldiers. Empress Taita personally organized reserve forces and ensured thousands of troops remained supplied with food, water, and ammunition throughout the battle. Every leader understood the importance of unity. Instead of competing for glory, they fought together for Ethiopia. As the hours passed, the Italian army began to collapse. Entire battalions threw down their weapons. Others fled through the mountains, hoping to escape. But the Ethiopian forces continued advancing with relentless determination. The battlefield became a scene of complete confusion. Smoke covered the valleys. Cannon stood abandoned. Broken wagons littered the rocky ground. The proud European army that had expected an easy victory was now fighting simply to survive. General Baratieri gave the order to retreat. But retreat quickly turned into panic. Exhausted soldiers ran through unfamiliar mountain trails. Many became separated from their units. Others were captured before they could escape. By the afternoon, the battle was over. The impossible had happened. A European colonial army had suffered one of its greatest defeats in Africa. More than 7,000 Italian soldiers were killed, thousands more were wounded, and several thousand were taken prisoner. Ethiopia also paid a heavy price. Thousands of brave Ethiopian warriors lost their lives defending their homeland. But their sacrifice had secured something priceless: freedom. For the first time during the era known as the Scramble for Africa, an African nation had decisively defeated a modern European invasion force in open battle. News of the victory spread rapidly across the world. In Rome, the announcement stunned the nation. People could hardly believe that their powerful army had been defeated. Government officials faced public outrage. Military leaders were blamed. Across Europe, newspapers called the outcome unbelievable. But across Africa, the reaction was very different. From villages to cities, people celebrated the victory. For millions living under colonial rule, Adwa became something far greater than a battlefield. It became proof that European armies were not invincible. It became a symbol of hope. And it inspired generations of Africans who dreamed of one day reclaiming their own freedom. End of Part 4. Part 5. The victory that changed history forever. As the smoke cleared over the mountains of Adwa, a new chapter in world history had begun. The battlefield was silent. Thousands had lost their lives. Families on both sides would mourn loved ones who never returned home. But one truth was now impossible to ignore. Ethiopia had done what almost no one believed was possible. It had defeated a modern European empire in open battle. For Italy, the defeat was devastating. The government in Rome faced nationwide anger. Military leaders were heavily criticized, and the dream of conquering Ethiopia had been shattered. Across Europe, newspapers struggled to explain how an African nation had defeated one of the continent's most advanced armies. The answer was not luck. It was leadership, preparation, unity, and an unbreakable determination to remain free. Just a few months later, Italy signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa, officially recognizing Ethiopia as an independent and sovereign nation. The false claims made through the Treaty of Wuchel were abandoned, and Italy was forced to accept what the battlefield had already proven. Ethiopia had won. At a time when nearly every corner of Africa was falling under colonial rule, Ethiopia remained proudly independent. That victory made the country a symbol of hope across the continent. From West Africa to Southern Africa, stories of Adwa spread from village to village. People spoke of the Ethiopian warriors who had stood together and defeated an empire many believed could never lose. Years later, African freedom fighters would look back at Adwa as proof that colonial powers were not invincible. The battle inspired generations of leaders who would eventually fight for independence throughout the 20th century. Even beyond Africa, the victory gained worldwide respect. Scholars studied Menelik II's leadership. Military historians analyzed his strategy. And political leaders recognized that Ethiopia had changed the balance of power in Africa. Today, every year on March 1st, Ethiopians celebrate Adwa Victory Day. Across the country, people gather to honor the courage of the men and women who defended their homeland. It is more than a military celebration. It is a celebration of freedom, of unity, of national pride. More than 130 years later, the story of Adwa continues to inspire people around the world. It reminds us that technology alone does not win wars. True strength comes from preparation, from leadership, from believing in something greater than yourself. The warriors of Adwa were not fighting for gold. They were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for the right to decide their own future. And because of their courage, Ethiopia became one of the greatest symbols of African independence. History often remembers the largest empires, the richest kingdoms, and the most powerful armies. But sometimes, history belongs to those who refuse to surrender. The Battle of Adwa was more than a victory. It was a message to the world. A message that courage can overcome fear, that unity can defeat division, and that even the mightiest empire can fall when a nation stands together. So the next time someone says Africa has no great military victories, remember the mountains of Adwa. Remember the warriors who stood their ground. Remember the emperor who united a nation. And remember the battle that changed history forever. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to discover more untold stories of Africa's greatest kings, queens, warriors, and empires, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because history is filled with incredible stories. And we've only just begun. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.